how would you define greatness? What would be the words that you use to describe that concept to someone? Maybe you would say something like William Shakespeare says here. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrusted upon them. Maybe you're like, well, that's a little cheesy. And so you would go something like this. No man is truly great who is great only in his lifetime. The test of greatness is the page of history. Maybe you take more of the legacy approach to greatness. That what matters is what's left after me, how people view me, what I've accomplished, what I've done, how long people remember me. Or maybe you're younger here in the audience, and you've been listening to a lot of TikTok and a lot of YouTube recently, and you're trying to form your idea of greatness, and you have voices like this influencing you. Success is not given, it's taken. You have to be aggressive and go after what you want in life. I found another quote. It's much different than the others, but I think it's a lot more accurate. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be a slave of all. If you would, please turn your Bibles to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10, that's where we're going to be at this evening. In this passage, Jesus has a conversation with two of his apostles. And his apostles have a misconception of what it means to be great. And that's affecting their walk and their values and how they view life. And right now, I think there's a lot of voices in the world telling us about greatness, what it means to be great. And that's affecting people younger than me, people my age, and people older than me. And so I want to look at the biblical view of what it means to be great. Maybe it's a lesson that not only James and John need to hear, but we do as well. Let's start in verse 32. I'm going to read the whole section, and then we'll walk through the text. And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed. And those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him, and spit on him, and flog him, and kill him. And after 3 days he will rise." And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one on your left, in your glory." And Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant, but is for those whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." When we approach this scene, we zoom in to James and John. And James and John, they have a stunted growth, where they should be at one place, but yet they're at another. Jesus has just told them that the greatest event in all of human history is about to happen. That he is going to die on the cross, but in 3 days he's going to rise. And instead of asking clarifying questions, instead of investigating that more, they're focused on themselves. They come to Jesus like children. I did this a lot growing up. My mom can attest to that. I would go up to her and I'd say, "Hey, I need to tell you something, but promise you won't be mad." And then that would usually end in a result of, "Yeah, I broke the dresser, I broke the ceiling fan, me and my brothers tackled each other into the closet, I jumped off the balcony, and I split the couch in half. My brother flipped me onto the bed, and we put a hole in the wall. Those are all true stories, by the way. And so I went up to her, and I was trying to safeguard myself, that I knew maybe what I was asking wasn't the appropriate thing to ask. And so I guarded myself from being reprimanded. And so with the same attitude, the attitude of a child, they come to Jesus in this way. But yet they're supposed to be like the guys. These are 2 of the 12 apostles. Not only are they 2 of the 12, but they're part of the inner circle of Jesus. James, John, and Peter. They see miracles like the transfiguration. They see miracles like the resurrection of Jairus' daughter. They should know better. But they don't. Instead, they go up to him. They ask this question, "Whatever we ask of you, please give it to us." And he's wise, like most parents are. And instead of signing a blank check, he asks them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they say, "Well, we know that you're about to go into your glory, and we want a seat, one at your right hand and one at your left." See, the person in the middle, well, they have the most power, they have the most glory, they have the most greatness. And so what James and John want is to be second and third in the kingdom. And they know that this point is about to happen soon, where Jesus is going to come into his glory. They're walking towards Jerusalem. And Luke's gospel, Luke's account, says they don't understand the words of Jesus. They don't understand what he's saying, that he's going to die, and they don't understand what he's saying when he's going to rise again. But they know something's going to happen in Jerusalem, because they have texts like this back in Isaiah 52, just in their brains. Or it says in Isaiah 52, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news." Might sound familiar. "Who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, 'Your God reigns.' The voice of your watchmen, they lift up their voice. Together they sing for joy. For eye to eye they see the return of the Lord to Zion. Break forth together into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem. For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem." And so they're thinking, okay, Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem, and he's going to set up this earthly kingdom, and he's going to redeem the people. He's going to bring salvation. This is going to be a new Exodus, just like Moses did in Egypt. Jesus is about to do that with us, with the Romans. And what I want out of that is second and third place. I want to be his generals. And so before we get to Jerusalem, I want to ask him this. I want to ask him to grant this to me. It's interesting that Jesus' response isn't rebuke. Jesus doesn't get mad at his apostles here. He doesn't yell at them, but instead he corrects them. I think one of the mistakes when people talk about greatness is saying, like, that's not something that matters or something that you should want at all. Greatness and glory is a desire that God has built in us. We want our lives to matter. We want to mean something. We want to be great in some way. But what can be wrong is our understanding of what it means to be great, on how to accomplish that. And so Jesus, like I said, offers this correction. And he says, you don't know what you're asking. Because if you want to be in my glory with me, you have to drink the cup that I drink. And this isn't saying that, like, from now on at the meals that we have together, if I get lemon water, you need to get lemon water. He's saying, hey, I'm about to drink a big swig of this cup of suffering. It's going to be intense, it's going to be a lot, and you're about to see all of it. And if you want to be in my glory, you also have to share in that cup. You have to share in the suffering that I'm about to go through. To share in God's suffering, or to share in God's glory means to share in his suffering too. If we want the same destination, we have to take the same path. We have to take the same journey. But Jesus doesn't say, you just have to take like a little swig of suffering, and if you just have to make your life like a little bit harder, and then like you can share in the glory with me. He continues and elaborates on this idea. He says, with the baptism with which I am baptized, you must be baptized. We have a baptistry behind me right here, and the word baptismo, baptism, means immersion. And so when we're baptized for the remission of our sins, we're immersed in the water. He's talking about the baptism of suffering. He's saying that you have to be baptized in suffering. You have to be fully immersed in it. That if there was like a pool in front of me, instead of water, it was like 10 foot deep of just suffering. And Jesus says, jump in the deep end. He says, jump in the deep end because that's what I'm about to do. I'm about to go to Jerusalem. And at Jerusalem, I'm going to be diving into that deep end head first. Some of my best friends are going to betray me. Everyone's going to leave me. I'm going to stand before a hypocritical religious council, and they're going to say that I'm worthy of death. But then when I go before a Gentile council, when I go before two corrupt governments, they're going to call me innocent. But yet they're going to still lead me towards death. But before I go on the cross, well, they're going to scourge me, and they're going to spit on me, and they're going to mock me. And then when I'm on that cross, my mother is going to watch me die. He says, if you want my glory, you need to jump in that deep end with me. If you want to be great, you have to be willing to suffer. And James and John, they respond, and they say, we are able. And I don't think this is so much highlighting, their ability and, how great James and John are. And, only the greatest among us, if we are able to accomplish this suffering, then we can share in the glory too. I think instead this is highlighting an attitude that James and John have. That I have a willingness to jump in that deep end of suffering. That I'm willing to do the hard things if that means sharing your glory, God. Sharing in your greatness. Because the thing is, if we're willing to go through the hard things, God makes us able to. That God is our strength, that God is our source of the way that we get through the suffering, through the hard things that we endure for His sake. But then it's interesting because this story continues onward. It continues onward, and it says that the 10 become indignant. They become really mad. They get upset. And you might be thinking, well, maybe they're getting mad for a good reason, that James and John are doing something wrong here, and they're trying to take it for themselves. That's not true, because before and after this event, these same guys are getting into an argument about who's the greatest. So it's not like Jesus in the beginning of this chapter who's getting indignant because they're rebuking the children for coming to him. Their source is not one of righteousness, it's not of doing the right thing, it's because they still don't understand. Because maybe the other 10 that were there are thinking, well, I'm willing to. I'm able to. That if you ask me to do the hard thing, if you ask me to jump in the deep end, I would do it too if that means that I get to be in your glory and that I get to be in power and I get to stomp on the enemies and I get to say something about these Romans that have been treating me and my family bad for so long. I would have been willing. And Jesus says, you don't get it. You don't get it, what it means to be great. It doesn't look like how you have it in your brain right now. He says, right now, you think of it like the Gentiles think about it. It says that that the Gentiles, those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles, they lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Those ideas mean to have power over people. That what it means to be a Gentile ruler is you exercise power and authority, that you're the guy. You're the man in charge, and everyone knows it, and you want everyone to know it. And that's how people think of greatness in the world. That you can shove it on them, that you can stomp on them, that you push others down to lift yourself up. And maybe you've met someone like this. They think of life kind of like a chessboard, And there's different people that are different pieces, but of course they're the king. And how they view other people in their lives is, well, they're just pawns. I'm going to move around, and I'm going to get rid of some sometimes, and sometimes I'm going to lift others up because they're helping me, but I'm just strategically moving everyone around, and I'm manipulating them. Because I'm the king, I'm the center of the universe, I'm what matters, because I'm so great. Are you seeking that type of greatness? Do you want everyone to know it? Are you chopping people at the knees to make them lower, to make yourself look higher? Because what Jesus says is it shall not be so among you. In verse 43, shall not be so among you. That how we view greatness needs to be different from how the world views greatness. Those things should not look similar. And when you have all these voices in the world telling us what greatness is, we don't need to listen to them. We need to drown them out, and we need to listen to this. We need to listen to Jesus and what he says greatness is. And what he says greatness is, let's read it in verse 43 together. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Do you know what that means? That means that being great is not based off the car that you drive. Being great is not how much weights that you can lift. Being great is not how many girls or guys you have flocking towards you. Being great is not having the most money or the nicest stuff. Being great is a choice that you can make. That means that the person in Sierra Leone, Africa, that has absolutely nothing, they can be great in the kingdom of God. Because they can make the choice to serve the people around them, to sacrifice for them. If your conception of greatness is the same as the world, that means that God's really unfair. Because only this really small minority can ever be great. And what God says is it's open to all who are willing. Now, what you need to do to become great is be a servant, but he expands on that. In verse 44, he says, whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. That not only are you serving the people around you, but you're becoming the absolute least. You're putting yourself on the bottom of the social class. Now, what I'm doing is I'm not thinking about how I can press people down and stomp on them and build myself up, but instead I'm getting under them and I'm building them up. That I'm doing the things that no one wants to do for the people that no one wants to do it for. That I'm getting down and I'm washing people's feet. I'm doing the dirty tasks. And I'm not just doing them for my friends. I'm not just doing them for my church family. I'm doing it for everyone around me. I'm becoming a servant. I'm becoming a slave to all. And the reason that God calls us to do this is because he first did it. This is not an expectation that he puts on us because, you need to do this and I'm going to be over here. He says, I lead the way. He led the way to Jerusalem. That we're following the one that is great. That's what makes us great. That even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Who do you think has the most right to be served, to treat people however they want to be treated? That I get to make those shots. If I want to push people down, if there was a chessboard to play with, the king would be Jesus, obviously. He has every right to treat people like this, but he doesn't. He doesn't. He lowers himself. Although he's the highest, he becomes the lowest. That he took the form of a servant and became obedient even to the point of death on the cross. And so now every knee will bow to him. God will lift him up. And if we want to be raised like he will be raised, we need to lower ourselves like he lowered himself. Jesus suffers with a purpose. He jumped in that deep end for a reason. He's serving in a certain way. He served us all by giving his life as a ransom. That without Jesus, we would be damned to hell. But because we have him, we have an opportunity to have salvation. He served each and every one of us. He served me. He served you. He paid the price for our salvation. I want to do something a little different here, maybe than is typically done at the end of sermons. I want to read a passage in Isaiah, a passage that I think really sums up the ideas that I've been talking about. This is a passage that we read often in the Lord's Supper. We think of in that context. But if you remember how at the beginning of this lesson, I talked about Isaiah 52. These ideas that this kingdom was going to get established in Jerusalem, and this was going to happen there. And that happens just before this section in Isaiah 53. In Isaiah 53, this suffering servant is talked about. And he's described in this way. And this is talking about Jesus, what he did for each and every one of us. How he suffered for you, how he suffered for me, and how he served you and how he served me. Let's read it together. Isaiah 53, starting in verse 3. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one for whom men hid their face. He was despised and was esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet was esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned, everyone, to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb is led to his slaughter, and like a sheep that has gone before its shears is silent. So he opened not his mouth. But oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people, and they made him grave with the wicked, and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. That's what Jesus has done for us, and that's the attitude that he expects us to do for others. And so I ask you, how would you define greatness? What are the words that you would use to explain that concept to someone? Would it be the words of Jesus? When he says, "But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be a slave of all." We're about to sing this song, "Dare to Stand Like Joshua." And this is a song about courage, about standing up for the truth, to be like Joshua, be strong and courageous. When we're going out into the world, are we standing up for the truth? Are we standing up for Jesus? Are we suffering as he did and serving as he did? Is this an attitude that I have? Is this an attitude that you have? And maybe you never really thought about what Jesus has done for you. That it really hit you, and you want to get your life right with God. That you haven't been living in the way that you need to. That you haven't started in that journey with him. That you've been avoiding that cup of suffering. That you haven't wanted to jump in the deep end yet. If you have a need, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.